How does a story about a warm and wholesome family film hide one of the most painful childhood memories of its star? Why would a young actress adored around the world later admit that she could never forgive her on-screen father? And what happens when two very different worlds collide on the same Hollywood set? These questions bring us to the fascinating and complicated story behind Disney's 1961 classic The Parent Trap and the strained, almost hostile relationship between its star, Hayley Mills, and her co-star Brian Keith. To millions of fans, The Parent Trap remains a symbol of joy and nostalgia, but for 14-year-old Hayley, filming the movie meant stepping into one of the most emotionally challenging periods of her young life. Hayley Catherine Rose Vivian Mills was born on April 18, 1946, into a world of English refinement and artistry. Her father, the legendary Sir John Mills, was one of Britain's most beloved actors, and her mother, Mary Hayley Bell, was a celebrated playwright. Hayley's early childhood was far removed from the chaos of Hollywood. She grew up on a large Sussex dairy farm, climbing trees and running through the countryside with her siblings. She was shy, sheltered, and completely unaware that destiny had marked her as one of the most iconic child stars of her generation. Her career began almost by chance when director J. Lee Thompson saw her playing in a garden and thought she was perfect for the lead role in the 1959 crime drama Tiger Bay. Hayley's natural, unaffected performance stunned critics and audiences alike. She won the British Academy Award for Most Promising Newcomer, an honor that would catapult her into the international spotlight. News of the young British actress reached Walt Disney himself thanks to his wife, Lillian, who insisted Walt watch Tiger Bay. At the time, Disney was searching for a fresh face for his upcoming film Pollyanna and had reportedly seen hundreds of auditions without finding the right fit. The moment he met Hayley, he knew he had found the star he had been looking for. In an almost fairy tale twist, Walt Disney signed Hayley to a 5-year, 6-picture contract, without even requiring a screen test, making her the crown jewel of the studio and its biggest child star since the days of Bobby Driscoll. For Hayley, the Disney lot became a second home. She would later describe Walt Disney as a kind, almost paternal figure who created a bubble of safety around her. He protected her from the harsher realities of show business, letting her grow up in an atmosphere of creativity and careful guidance. Within this nurturing environment, Hayley flourished and delivered a string of charming performances that solidified her status as Disney's golden girl. But that protective bubble was about to be tested in a way she could never have imagined when she began work on The Parent Trap. On the other side of this story was Brian Keith, a man whose life and personality could not have been more different from Hayley's. Born in 1921 in Bayonne, New Jersey, Brian came from a family of actors, but his childhood was far from idyllic. His parents divorced when he was young, and during his brief years with his stepmother, Broadway actress Peg Entwistle, tragedy struck when she died by suicide in 1932 by leaping from the Hollywood sign. This event left a lasting scar on Brian's young psyche. By the time he was 19, Brian had joined the United States Marine Corps, serving as a radioman and tail gunner during the most harrowing missions in the Pacific theater of World War II. He flew dangerous bombing missions and earned the Air Medal for bravery. These experiences hardened him, instilling a direct, disciplined approach to life and work. After the war, he returned to acting, building a career playing gruff, tough characters, cowboys, soldiers, no-nonsense men who didn't waste words. This wasn't just acting. It reflected Brian's real personality. He was blunt, efficient, and had little patience for delays or inefficiency. When Brian Keith was cast as the father in The Parent Trap, the contrast between his personality and the carefully managed methodical Disney set became immediately apparent. The film was one of Disney's most technically ambitious projects, relying on the revolutionary sodium vapor process to allow Hayley to play twin sisters interacting with each other on screen. This process required absolute precision. Scenes had to be filmed twice, with Hayley performing as one sister, then repeating the same actions and lines as the other sister while matching timing and positioning perfectly. Even the smallest deviation could ruin a shot and force an entire scene to be res-hot from scratch. For a 14-year-old carrying an entire film, this was a monumental challenge. She not only had to maintain focus through long, repetitive shooting days but also master 2 distinct American accents, one for each twin, all while switching back and forth between characters, sometimes multiple times in the same day. The pressure was intense, and while the Disney team tried to shield her from stress, the demands of the production left little room for mistakes. Brian Keith, used to a looser, more spontaneous acting style, quickly grew frustrated with the endless repetitions and technical delays. Where Hayley needed patience, encouragement, and reassurance, Brian brought a brusque, military-honed efficiency. He reportedly rolled his eyes when she asked for line clarifications and mocked her British mannerisms. Some accounts suggest he even called her the Golden Goose, implying she was Disney's prized moneymaker. Whether meant as a joke or not, comments like these cut deeply into Hayley's sensitive nature. Each day on set seemed to widen the gap between them, and Hayley began to feel that Brian not only disliked her but actively resented her presence. Co-stars later described Brian as direct and outspoken, sometimes intimidating, but not cruel. Kathy Garver, who worked with him later, remembered him as supportive and even warm in different circumstances. Yet for Hayley, whose self-confidence was still forming, Brian's bluntness felt personal. The set, which had once been her safe space, began to feel hostile. The irony of the situation was hard to miss. While audiences would eventually watch a heartwarming story about a father and his two daughters reconnecting, behind the scenes the relationship between the real father figure and the young actress was chilly and strained. Hayley would later admit in interviews that she hated Brian Keith during filming and never truly forgave him. She explained that it wasn't one dramatic event that made her feel this way, but rather a constant sense of being belittled and brushed aside. In an age when child actors had little voice or power, she had no choice but to endure it silently. This experience haunted her for decades. At the height of her fame, when she should have felt most supported, she was left with a deep wound that chipped away at her confidence. In fairness, Brian Keith was not a villain. Many of his colleagues admired him for his professionalism and found him charming in his own rugged way. Maureen O'Hara, who played Hayley's mother in the film, had worked with Brian on other projects and praised his abilities as a co-star. But Brian was a man shaped by war, by loss, by a life that demanded toughness, and he likely didn't realize how much his brusque behavior impacted the fragile emotions of a teenager carrying the weight of a massive production. He wasn't there to mentor her. He was there to do his job as efficiently as possible. Yet to Hayley, that efficiency felt like coldness, and that coldness became something she carried with her for years. When her Disney contract ended, Hayley began seeking roles that would free her from the image of the eternally cheerful Disney heroine. She wanted to prove to herself and the world that she was more than a child star. One of her boldest career moves came with the 1966 film The Family Way, in which she took on a mature role that even included a controversial nude scene. A deliberate signal that she was stepping out of her protected Disney past and into the adult film world on her own terms. This rebellion against her Disney image was partly fueled by the disillusionment she had felt during The Parent Trap. Meanwhile, Brian Keith's career took a new direction with the 1966 sitcom Family Affair, where he played Uncle Bill Davis, a gruff bachelor unexpectedly raising 3 orphan children. The show was a massive success and earned Brian 3 Emmy nominations, helping him redefine his public image as not just tough but also tender and lovable. Audiences saw him as the ideal mix of strength and compassion, which must have seemed ironic to Hayley given their fraught working relationship years earlier. Life, however, was not always kind to Brian. Behind the scenes, he faced personal struggles, including health issues and the tragic death of his daughter in 1997. Just months later, Brian himself died by suicide, leaving fans shocked and grieving. His death reminded the public that even those who seemed the strongest could be carrying unbearable pain. Today, The Parent Trap is remembered as one of Disney's most beloved classics, a film that continues to delight audiences with its clever split-screen effects, charming performances, and timeless story about family reunion. Yet the story of Hayley Mills and Brian Keith adds a layer of complexity to the movie's legacy. It reminds us that behind Hollywood's bright lights and perfect images are real people with real emotions, sometimes clashing, sometimes hurting one another in ways that last a lifetime. For Hayley, the film became both a triumph of her young career and a symbol of her most difficult growing pains. For Brian, it was one more job in a career defined by discipline and professionalism, though one that left an unintended mark on his co-star. The quiet conflict between Hayley Mills and Brian Keith shows how 2 different life experiences can collide and create lasting impact. It is a story of innocence meeting toughness, of a young girl's vulnerability clashing with a man's hardened exterior, and of how even in the happiest Hollywood stories, there can be shadows just out of frame. If you enjoyed this look behind the curtain of one of Disney's most beloved films and the complicated people who brought it to life, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more fascinating stories from the hidden side of Hollywood history.